The bell rang once, then again, then it did not stop. It was October 1347, and in the harbor town of Messina, on the eastern coast of Sicily, 12 Genoese trading ships had just arrived from the Black Sea. The port officials who came to meet them would later describe what they saw, or try to. The sailors on the ships were dying. Those still alive were covered in black swellings the size of eggs, oozing blood and pus on their necks, armpits, and groins. Their skin had gone dark in patches. Their breath smelled of rot. The port authorities ordered the ships out of the harbor immediately, but it was already too late. The plague, what we now call the Black Death, had come ashore. What followed over the next 4 years would kill between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population, somewhere between 25 and 50 million people. 1 in 3. In some cities, more. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew how it spread. Nobody knew how to stop it. The disease moved the way trade moved, which is to say it moved fast and it moved everywhere. From Sicily, it crossed to mainland Italy, Genoa, Venice, Florence. From the ports it went inland along the roads. It crossed the Alps, it reached France by the spring of 1348, England by summer. By 1349 it was in Germany, Poland, Scandinavia. By 1353 it had reached Russia. It killed within days, sometimes within hours. A person could go to sleep healthy and be dead by morning. Families abandoned their sick. Priests refused last rites. Doctors fled the cities. The infrastructure of daily life, the systems of care and community and obligation that held medieval society together, began to fail at the same moment it was needed most. The Church had no answers. This was perhaps the deepest wound the plague inflicted, deeper even than the bodies. The medieval Catholic Church held that it was the intermediary between humanity and God. It promised that faith would be rewarded, that prayer had power, that God was watching and just. The plague killed priests and bishops and cardinals at the same rate as everyone else. Some abandoned their flocks. Some sold last rites for money. Some simply disappeared. In the vacuum left by the Church's failure, desperate people reached for anything. Flagellants, men who whipped themselves publicly, sometimes drawing blood, marched through cities in processions, chanting, believing that extreme self-punishment might appease a God who seemed to have abandoned his people. They drew enormous crowds. They also drew suspicion. Someone had to be blamed. The answer in dozens of European cities was the Jews. Rumors spread, impossible, unfounded, that Jews had poisoned the wells. Pogroms followed. Strasbourg, Mainz, Frankfurt. Entire Jewish communities were massacred before the plague even arrived in those cities. Pope Clement VI issued papal bulls stating that Jews were not responsible and were dying of plague at the same rate as Christians. He was largely ignored. The plague did not only destroy, it also, slowly over decades, remade. The sheer scale of death created a labor shortage that hadn't existed in centuries. Peasants who had survived suddenly had leverage. If a lord treated them badly, they could leave and find work elsewhere. Wages rose. Serfdom, the system that had kept the peasantry bound to the land for centuries, began to crack. It did not collapse overnight, but the Black Death was the beginning of the end of feudal Europe. Artists who survived the plague painted what they had seen. The danse macabre, the dance of death, appeared across European art, skeletal figures pulling kings, popes, merchants, and peasants together into the same procession. Death as the great equalizer. Art turned dark, obsessive, intimate with mortality in a way it had never been before. The old certainties were gone, the Church was weakened, the feudal order was cracking. In the space left behind, new ideas began to move. The Renaissance, which would begin in earnest in Italy within decades, was fed by this catastrophe, by the collapse of old authority, by the sudden premium placed on human life and human skill, by the need to rebuild and rethink everything. It is difficult to look at the Black Death and find meaning. The scale of the suffering resists it. 50 million people, entire villages erased. Children who survived grew up in a world where most of the adults they had known were gone. And yet the world that emerged from the Black Death was different from the world that entered it. Not better, not yet, but changed. The plague stripped away every illusion that authority was permanent, that the strong would protect the weak, that faith alone was a shield. What replaced those illusions was something harder and more honest. The recognition that humanity was fragile, that systems fail, that survival required rebuilding, always. The bell rang once, then again. And then, eventually, after years that seemed to have no end, it stopped. The plague was over. Europe was not the same. It never would be again.